Hello and welcome to Good Nightmare, a podcast where we talk about all things spooky, creepy and just a little bit odd. Today's episode was inspired by a conversation I was having with my friends, and by friends I mean my internet friends. We were talking about who we were named after or where our names came from our parents. And I was asking my mum about where my name came from a little while ago and double checked on the last name so I could get this right for the episode. So I was named after two Sarahs. One was I believe my grandma's, or my nana as I call her, my nan's friend had a daughter named Sarah who was kind and gentle and just a really sweet girl. And the other Sarah was Sarah Bernhardt. So a little bit of a contrasting set of Sarahs. Sarah Bernhardt was a French actress born in October 1844. She was incredibly successful and was acting in popular French plays, including those written by Victor Hugo, who you may know as the author of Les Mis, and Alexandre Dumas, I hope I pronounced that correctly, who is very well known for writing The Three Musketeers. I actually didn't know that they'd written plays, but I love reading plays, so I'm definitely going to have to see if I can find copies of these. Sarah Bernhardt toured the world acting and singing, and she was actually one of the first popular actresses to act in motion pictures and record sound. She grew up without much parental intervention, unfortunately. Her father was absent and unknown, though he was suspected to be a wealthy merchant, and her mother was often travelling and rarely home. Sarah was housed with a nurse through her early childhood, given that her parents weren't around, and at 7 years old she was sent to live at a boarding school. Sarah learned of her father's death in 1859. As he'd been paying for her education, her mother then had to come home and decide what should be done with her daughter. It was recommended that Sarah should become an actress. Quite an unusual path for what we would imagine in our day and time. It'd probably be more like you should learn a trade, although I guess acting is a kind of trade. At this point, she had no experience and had never been to a theatre, so she was understandably nervous. The first play that Sarah attended was Britannicus by, I'm going to pronounce this incorrectly, I'm sorry, Jean Racine, and Amphitryon by Plautus, I'm not too sure, played back to back. She was incredibly moved by the performance, and it was at that moment she decided that she was made for acting. Her acting career began in boarding school, where she played the Queen of the Fairies in the stage act Clotilde. While Sarah was incredibly successful in acting, it wasn't the only interesting thing about her. Sarah was known to have a quick temper, a generous nature, and many strange traits, which honestly sounds a lot like me. When a theatre doorkeeper called her Little Bernhardt, she apparently broke an umbrella over his head, being frustrated with the name. But she apologised profusely later on, and even 20 years later, when this doorkeeper retired, she bought him a cottage in Normandy. When Sarah Bernhardt witnessed an actress, Madame Natalie, push another woman into a stone column for standing on her gown and harming the young woman, Sarah approached Madame Natalie and slapped her across the face, and then refused to apologise until Natalie apologised to the woman that she'd hurt. I'm sure a lot of us wish we had the, not so much bravery, but the ability to do this when we see someone hurt by someone who just is incredibly callous. Sarah had 7 fears, as written about in the Omaha Daily Bee in 1905. These were being buried alive, becoming thin, her son ceasing to love her, one that I personally share with her, dying rich, as she believed it was a sin to have too much money, losing her beauty, that another actress would be thought to be as great as she was, and growing old on stage. She faced these fears head on. As quoted in the Omaha Daily Bee, Sarah decided that instead of waiting to be an old woman, she would retire while she was young. To face her fear of being buried alive, she purchased a coffin to keep in her home and to sleep in. She adorned it with lace, satin, and decorated it beautifully. And she said she had, quote, never slept so soundly in her life as she did in that coffin. In the Columbus Journal, Nebraska, 1879, a fellow actress, Mary Anderson, spoke of Sarah's unusual personality. She said, "She slept in a coffin continually for 3 years. She does not do so now. I asked her why she gave up the habit. She said she had grown tired of it as the coffin was uncomfortable. She said she also wished to familiarize herself with the thought of death. I saw her boudoir. The carpet was of black velvet, with flowers in silver, the furniture covered with black velvet, and the walls curiously decorated in the same fashion. A skeleton of a man who, she said, had died of love in Mantua hung before the mirror, with a finger pointing at its own reflection. In large bowls about the room, rose leaves were heaped. The fragrance that arose was overpowering. I could not remain in the room. It was so suggestive of horrible thoughts." Unquote. Honestly, that sounds like an incredible room to me. Sarah's life was not without difficulty or tragedy. In 1915, she had her leg amputated after dealing with chronic pain from an injury that she incurred on stage. The Omaha Daily Bee in 1915, however, posed this amputation as her having her leg amputated as a, quote, heroic example to the soldiers facing death and mutilation during the war. Sarah had her own tomb built years before her death and would often visit the site to leave flowers and possibly contemplate life and death and what comes before or after. And perhaps one of the most unusual things she was known for, aside from all of the things we've already spoken about, is that she owned a human skull, which she named Sophie. It was given to her as a gift by Victor Hugo, and she took it with her everywhere she went. The skull was polished and had hinges added to the jaw so she could keep letters and notes in its jaw. And as friends visited her, she would have them write messages on the skull. Sophie was a beloved item and friend of Sarah's. Friend as in the skull, not the person who it belonged to. I don't believe they knew each other. Sarah unfortunately passed away in 1923 from uremic poisoning. I hope you enjoyed this first episode of 2022, and I hope you'll continue joining me for future episodes. I would love to hear from you about who you were named after and any of their unusual traits. So please get in contact on Facebook or Instagram or anywhere you see me on social media at goodnightmare_s. I also will link Tidings of Yore, the blog, in the show notes so that you can see some additional photos and articles written about Sarah Bernhardt. Until next time, sweet dreams.